town of Willow Creek was small, so small that everyone knew everyone's business. Or at least they thought they did. Nestled between rolling hills and lined with white picket fences, it looked like the kind of place where nothing bad ever happened. But for Captain Emily Parker, Willow Creek had never felt like home, not truly. Emily had returned to this sleepy town 5 years ago, after completing nearly a decade of service in the U.S. Army Special Forces. She had been one of the first women to earn her place on a Tier 1 operations team, the kind of unit that only existed in legends, the kind whispered about in news reports or in hushed tones by family members. Yet back in Willow Creek, that part of her life was invisible. She had wanted peace. She had wanted normal. But the town didn't know how to handle someone like her, someone who had stared danger in the face and survived. So she stayed quiet. She worked at the local hardware store, fixing shelves and giving polite smiles. She avoided parties and church socials. She even refused to speak much about her time in the military, except for the occasional "I served" when it came up. And that was enough for people to dismiss her. Military? Sure, sweetie, whatever you say, they'd chuckle. Men at the hardware store would smirk as they watched her lift a 50-pound bag of cement with ease. Young women would roll their eyes when she declined an invitation to the weekly book club. They assumed her silence meant weakness, that her service was a story she had embellished. Emily didn't care. She had survived the deserts of Afghanistan, the swamps of Panama, and countless training exercises that had pushed her body to the edge. A few whispers in a small-town cafe were nothing, but she couldn't ignore it entirely. Not when the world she had fought to protect started slipping into her quiet life. It began one Tuesday afternoon. Emily was at the hardware store, restocking the aisles with plumbing supplies. She had just finished labeling a shelf when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up and froze for a moment. The man who walked in was tall, rugged, and completely out of place in Willow Creek. He had the kind of presence that made people notice without trying, the kind that made Emily's instincts twitch. Her fingers tightened around the clipboard in her hands. "Can I help you?" she asked, keeping her voice calm. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, I need supplies. Some basic stuff, you know. For a cabin." Emily nodded and led him down the aisle. But something about the way he scanned the shelves, the way his eyes lingered on her, set her nerves on edge. She tried to shake it off. Paranoia was easy when you'd spent years in combat. Over the next hour, he wandered the store, asking questions about tools, nails, and propane tanks. Every so often, he would stop and glance at her. Every time he did, a small, familiar voice in her head whispered, "You've seen that before." She couldn't place it. Not yet. Then, as she was checking inventory in the back, she heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible hiss of recognition. Emily Parker. Her heart stopped. She hadn't used her real name in years outside of official documents. Not in public. Not anywhere people could connect to her past. She turned sharply. The man from the store was standing by the counter, a cold, steady look in his eyes. "I know you," he said, his voice low. "I know what you did." Emily forced herself to stay calm. "I think you have the wrong person," she said, her voice steady but firm. He chuckled. "No, I know you. You were the one they all underestimated. The one who disappeared from the headlines, the one no one believed could do it. The soldier who left them all in the dust." Emily's pulse quickened. This was impossible. Nobody from her military days had ever followed her here. Nobody knew where she had gone, and yet, this man knew. "Who are you?" she asked, taking a small step back. Her hand subtly brushed against the concealed taser in her jacket. He tilted his head. "I used to be someone you took down. Once upon a time you made me lose everything." His voice was almost reverent. "And now? I've come back. But you?" His gaze sharpened. "You're the reason I surrender." Emily froze, her mind racing. He recognized her, not just her face, but her voice. That distinctive cadence, that calm under pressure. She had trained herself to hide it, to leave it behind. But there it was, unmistakable. And he knew exactly who she was. The room felt suddenly smaller, the walls closing in. She realized then how much she had underestimated this small-town encounter. He wasn't just some curious stranger, he was a threat. And unlike the mundane life she had tried to slip into, this threat was personal. Then he smiled. And that smile was the smile of a man who had already decided the outcome of a confrontation. Emily's instincts kicked in. She moved toward the back exit, subtly blocking the aisles between them. Every step was deliberate, calculated. Every breath measured. She was no longer just a woman in a small-town hardware store. She was the soldier who had trained for this moment her entire life, though she had hoped she'd never need it again. "You're bluffing," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You don't know me. You don't know what I'm capable of." He laughed softly. "I know everything, and I've been waiting a long time for this." For the first time in years, Emily allowed herself to acknowledge fear. Not the fear of dying, she had faced that countless times, but the fear of failure in front of someone who had counted on her silence, someone who had depended on her to keep the darkness at bay. She squared her shoulders. Her voice dropped to a calm, steady whisper. "Then I guess it's time you learned something you should have learned a long time ago." "Nobody underestimates me," the man froze. Recognition flashed in his eyes. And that was all Emily needed. Because in that moment she realized something powerful. She didn't have to prove herself to the town or to anyone else. She only had to prove herself here, now, against someone who knew exactly who she was. And for the first time in years, Emily felt the surge of adrenaline she had lived for. The clarity of purpose, the focus, the knowledge that every decision could mean life or death. She wasn't just Emily Parker, the quiet woman in Willow Creek. She was Emily Parker, Special Forces operative, a soldier who had faced death more times than she could count. And now, the past she had tried to bury was coming back not as a shadow but as a weapon. The bell above the door jingled again as the man stepped closer. Emily's hand hovered over her taser. The moment stretched. The town outside remained oblivious. Inside, two people measured each other in silence, the air thick with anticipation. Until finally Emily spoke. "Drop the weapon," she said, her voice low but firm. "It doesn't have to end like this. You surrender now." The man's eyes widened, and then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. For Emily, that was the first twist in a story she had never intended to tell, a story where silence had protected her, until her voice became the weapon that could bring a dangerous man to his knees. The hardware store had returned to its usual quiet the moment the man left, nodding faintly, almost mechanically before stepping out into the crisp afternoon. Emily stood behind the counter, her heart hammering in her chest, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She had survived firefights, ambushes, and covert operations in hostile territories. Yet something about the encounter in Willow Creek, the sudden recognition, the personal stakes, made her feel exposed in a way she hadn't felt in years. She sank into a chair behind the counter, hands trembling slightly, and tried to process what had just happened. This was supposed to be her safe place, her refuge, a town that didn't ask questions and where her past could remain buried. But now the past had followed her home and it wasn't content to stay silent. Emily knew what she had to do first, report it. But when she called the local police, she was met with polite skepticism. "Yes, ma'am, we understand," said Officer Reynolds, his voice tight with disbelief. "But, you don't actually have any proof, do you? A name, a record, anything?" "I don't need proof," Emily said, her voice steady but her frustration bubbling underneath. "I saw him. He recognized me. I've trained for situations like this. He's dangerous. He's connected to things you can't even imagine." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Ma'am, I'm not saying you're lying. I'm just saying, people around here don't believe in, well, that kind of thing." Emily felt a familiar ache, the one she had felt countless times in her career. Being underestimated, being dismissed because of her gender, because she was quiet, because she didn't fit the mold. She had seen it in briefing rooms, in combat simulations, in intelligence meetings, and now even here at home the pattern repeated. "Officer Reynolds," and she said, her tone hardening, "listen carefully. I don't ask for your belief. I ask for action. If he shows up again, you need to be ready, because this isn't speculation. It's happening." The line went silent and Emily hung up, knowing that she couldn't wait for anyone else to catch up. If she wanted to protect this town and herself, she had to take matters into her own hands. She returned to her small apartment above the hardware store. It was modest, filled with practical furniture and few personal touches. She removed her jacket and boots and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of envelopes she had kept since returning home. These were letters, commendations, and certificates from her military career, reminders of who she had been, who she still was. She hadn't needed them in Willow Creek. No one had asked. No one had cared. But now she understood their value. They weren't just paper. They were proof. Proof of training, proof of courage, proof that she could handle the threat that had found her. Emily began a methodical review. She traced her steps over the past few months, trying to recall if there had been any signs, any anomalies that could explain how this man had found her. The answer was frustratingly simple. She had no idea. Her service had been classified, her movements carefully obscured. Yet here he was. The next morning, she returned to the hardware store, acting as if nothing had happened. But inside, her senses were sharper than ever. Every customer, every movement, every sound was cataloged and analyzed. Emily was no longer just a store clerk. She was a sentinel, scanning for threats in plain sight. By mid-afternoon, the man returned. This time, he didn't hide. He walked directly toward her, his presence deliberate, almost theatrical. Emily stayed behind the counter, heart steady but alert. "You didn't forget me," he said, almost smugly. "I didn't need to," Emily replied, her voice calm but carrying a weight that made him pause. "You know why you're here. Step away or this ends badly for you," he smirked. "You're not scared?" Emily's eyes narrowed. "I don't scare easily, and neither do the people I protect." There was a beat of silence charged with tension. Then he tilted his head. "Why are you hiding here, Emily? Why keep silent when you could have been famous?" She didn't flinch. "Because this isn't about fame. It's about survival. It's about keeping people alive, something you wouldn't understand." The man laughed, but it was hollow. He was testing her, trying to gauge whether she could be intimidated. But Emily didn't waver. Her training, her discipline, her years in operations where hesitation meant death, it all came together in a calm, impenetrable shield. And then, the twist. A sudden commotion at the door. The town sheriff had arrived, flanked by 2 deputies. They had finally taken her call seriously. The man froze, realizing he had miscalculated. Emily's eyes flicked to the sheriff. "He's dangerous. He knows me. He has a history I can't disclose here, but trust me, he can't be left alone." The sheriff stepped forward cautiously. "Ma'am, we'll handle it." "Step back," but Emily didn't step back. Instead, she made her move. Years of military strategy and tactical maneuvers kicked in. She positioned herself between the man and the exit, her voice sharp, commanding. "You surrender," she said, each word deliberate, "or I make sure you can't hurt anyone ever again." And then it happened. Recognition flashed across his face. He knew her. Not just the face, not just the presence, but the authority in her voice, the unmistakable tone of someone who had lived in life or death situations. And for the first time, he hesitated. Emily's calm resolve held him in place. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered his hands. The sheriff moved in, cuffing him quickly while Emily kept her eyes locked on his. You know me," he muttered, disbelief in his voice. "I know exactly who you are," Emily replied. "And that's why this ends here." The deputies led him away, and Emily felt a wave of exhaustion hit her. The adrenaline faded, leaving her drained but triumphant. She had faced the disbelief of the town, the skepticism of the authorities, and the threat itself. And she had prevailed, not with brute force, but with precision, courage, and the quiet power of her presence. Yet the story wasn't over. Because as the sheriff turned to her, Emily realized something she hadn't expected. The man hadn't just been some random criminal. He was a part of a network, a dangerous network that had once threatened global security. And now, Willow Creek had unknowingly become a battleground. Emily looked out at the town, at the streets she had walked every day thinking they were safe. The realization hit her hard. The silence she had chosen, the life she had hidden behind, could no longer protect her neighbors. She had to step fully into her role, the soldier, the protector, the hero she had tried to leave behind. And for the first time in years, Emily Parker spoke openly about her service. Not to boast, not for recognition, but because it mattered. Because her voice, once silent, was now the weapon that could save lives. And Willow Creek was about to learn that the quiet woman they had underestimated was, in truth, their greatest defense. The night after the hardware store incident, Willow Creek seemed to hold its breath. Streetlights flickered in the gentle wind, casting long shadows across the empty streets. Emily sat in her small apartment, reviewing every detail of the day over and over in her mind. Every movement of the man, every word spoken, every subtle signal, Nothing had escaped her notice. She knew the sheriff had filed the report, but she also knew that the town's trust in her abilities had limits. Even with the deputy's help, the weight of responsibility fell squarely on her shoulders. She had faced life-and-death situations abroad, but here, in a place that promised normalcy, the stakes felt unexpectedly personal. She was protecting a community that had barely acknowledged her existence until now. Emily pulled out her laptop and started digging. Her military experience wasn't just physical. It was analytical. She traced the man's known affiliations, cross-referencing news reports, federal notices, and intelligence archives that were still accessible to her through secure channels she had maintained post-service. Patterns began to emerge, a network, sophisticated and organized, that had remained hidden, quietly infiltrating even the most unsuspecting towns. Her research revealed something chilling. The man wasn't acting alone. He was part of a larger plan, one that had been quietly unfolding for months. A plan that could devastate more than just Willow Creek, but Emily didn't panic. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Instead, she crafted a strategy. First, she would ensure the town's immediate safety. Then she would lure the man into a position where he had no choice but to expose his network. It was a game she had played many times in the past, but never on home soil. The next morning, she visited the hardware store early, locking the doors behind her to create a controlled environment. She set up cameras discreetly and reviewed footage from previous days. Every delivery, every visitor, every interaction, she cataloged it meticulously. She knew the man would return. The question was when. By mid-morning, the first signs appeared. Subtle movements outside the store. Someone trying the door handle when they thought it was locked. Emily observed silently, her body tense, every sense on high alert. She waited, biding her time, knowing that the moment to act had to be precise. Hours passed. Then, as the sun reached its peak, he returned. The man's approach was different this time, measured, cautious. He had clearly realized she wasn't just a quiet woman anymore. Emily didn't move immediately. Instead, she watched, noting his gait, his posture, the slight twitch in his left shoulder. She recognized it instantly, combat training. He was not just a criminal. He was trained. Her mind raced through contingency plans. She needed witnesses. She needed proof. She needed leverage. And most importantly, she needed him alive and talking. "You're patient," he said as he stepped inside, voice low, almost taunting. "I didn't think you'd sit and wait. You could have fled, gone underground, but you didn't." Emily stayed calm, maintaining the subtle dominance she had learned over years in the field. "Running solves nothing," she replied. "You need to leave and you need to come clean. Otherwise," her finger brushed against the taser concealed under her jacket, "I ensure you face consequences you haven't even imagined." The man smirked, but Emily noticed the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Recognition, fear, respect. The kind she had earned in deserts, jungles and battlefields, but never here. In her quiet hometown, then he spoke a name from a past mission, one she hadn't shared with a soul in Willow Creek. The name was whispered, almost like a confession. And Emily's heart tightened, not with fear, but with the awareness that the network he belonged to had crossed paths with hers before, and she had unfinished business. "I underestimated you," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "I thought you'd stay hidden. I thought nobody would know. You thought wrong," Emily said. Her tone was sharp, cutting through the tension. "I've survived worse. I've faced worse, and you're not ready for what comes next." He laughed, but it was hollow. He knew the truth in her words. He could see it in her eyes. The years of training, the battles fought, the countless lives she had saved, often alone, often unseen. And now, in this small town, she wielded her past like a weapon. Emily moved with precision, positioning herself so that he was effectively trapped. Not physically. He was skilled enough to overpower her if he tried, but psychologically. She spoke softly but firmly, recounting key moments from her career that only someone intimately involved could know. Afghanistan, Panama, the covert operation in Eastern Europe that had disrupted a high-value target network. Each detail a thread pulling him tighter into recognition, into compliance, and it worked. "You," he stammered, eyes wide. "You were there. I remember your voice. I recognized it." Emily's lips curved into a small, controlled smile. She had anticipated this. Her silence had been her armor, her weapon, and now it had done what years of direct confrontation could not. Broken him without a fight. "You surrender," she said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that brooked no argument. "You give me your network. You give me names. You give me everything. Or you face the consequences alone." The man hesitated. Then slowly, deliberately, he raised his hands. It was a surrender born not out of fear alone, but out of recognition. Recognition of someone who had faced the darkness and returned unbroken. Emily exhaled, allowing herself a brief moment of relief. She had done it. She had neutralized the immediate threat. But the larger battle, the exposure of the network, was just beginning. She would need the authorities to take her seriously this time. She would need evidence, documentation, and cooperation. And most of all, she would need to trust her instincts. The same instincts that had carried her through countless missions. That night, Emily sat on her apartment balcony looking out over Willow Creek. The town slept peacefully, unaware of the danger that had passed so close to their doors. For the first time in years, she allowed herself a thought she had suppressed for too long. Maybe she didn't have to hide anymore. Maybe her service, her skills, her courage, they weren't things to keep secret. They were tools, and now more than ever they were needed. But as she stared into the darkened streets, she couldn't shake one nagging thought. The man had surrendered? Yes. But why here? Why now? And what about the others in his network? The answer would come soon enough. Emily had learned to wait, to watch, to plan. And Willow Creek would discover the truth. The quiet woman who had been underestimated for so long was, in fact, the most formidable protector they would ever know. And when the final confrontation came, there would be no doubt, no disbelief, and no underestimation. Emily Parker had returned, not just to Willow Creek, but to her mission, and this time she would see it through to the end. The sun rose over Willow Creek like nothing had changed. The streets were quiet, the town still wrapped in its small-town rhythm of routines and muted expectations. Yet inside Emily Parker, the calm was deceptive. Beneath the surface, her mind worked faster than ever, replaying every detail, analyzing every interaction with the man who had recognized her voice. He had surrendered, but surrender did not mean resolution. Not yet. Not while there were others waiting in the shadows, a network of dangerous people connected to him, watching, planning, and perhaps ready to strike. Emily knew that her work had only begun. The sheriff had reluctantly agreed to let her take the lead in the investigation. His skepticism had waned after witnessing the man's compliance and the subtle power Emily wielded without violence. But still some in the town whispered doubts. They couldn't reconcile the quiet woman they had ignored for years with the decisive, commanding presence that had just neutralized a trained operative. Emily ignored the whispers. She had spent her life proving herself in arenas far more unforgiving than Willow Creek. Today, she had a different mission: uncover the network, ensure the town's safety, and finally reclaim the voice she had kept hidden for so long. She began with the man himself. He had been taken to a secure holding facility, still dazed by the events that had unfolded in the hardware store. Emily visited him under strict supervision, using her presence strategically. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten. She simply spoke, recounting incidents only he could know, operations he had survived, near misses, decisions that had cost lives. "You remember now, don't you?" she said quietly. "You know who I am. You know what I'm capable of." He nodded uneasily. Yes, I remember. I recognize everything. And because of that," Emily continued, "you surrendered. You didn't have to, but you did. That tells me something. It tells me you respect the truth, that you know when to end the game before it ends you." The man's eyes flicked to the floor. I didn't think anyone here could. No one could. Emily cut him off. "There's no one else, just me. And now, if you want to protect yourself, if you want to avoid the consequences of your choices, you will tell me everything. Every name, every connection, every plan. Willow Creek doesn't deserve to be collateral damage in your ambition." Silence stretched, heavy and tense. Then slowly, carefully, he began to speak. Names, dates, safe houses, codes. Every secret detail of the network unfolded in the quiet of the holding room. Emily listened intently, recording, memorizing, and cataloging each revelation. Her military mind worked tirelessly, assessing risk, predicting next moves, and identifying weaknesses. By nightfall, she had the entire network mapped out. Every connection, every potential threat, and every vulnerable point. The pieces fit together seamlessly, and Emily knew exactly how to dismantle it. But she didn't act alone. She coordinated with the FBI, local authorities, and select military contacts who had cleared her post-service work. The operation had to be precise, swift, and total. One misstep, one hesitation, and lives would be lost. The raids began at dawn. Emily was not just the planner. She was present on site, guiding authorities, coordinating entry points, and ensuring the operation's success. Her presence was quiet but unmistakable, authoritative, composed, a force to be reckoned with. By the end of the day, every target was accounted for. Arrests were made, safe houses were secured, and the network that had threatened Willow Creek and beyond was dismantled completely. And yet, even in the aftermath, Emily's story remained largely untold. The town watched in awe as she appeared in local news reports, not as the quiet hardware store clerk, but as the woman whose voice had led to the surrender of a dangerous criminal network. For the first time, the whispers changed. Instead of disbelief, there was respect. Instead of doubt, there was admiration. People began to see her for what she truly was, a soldier, a protector, and a hero who had lived through dangers most could not imagine. But the real twist came weeks later. Emily returned to her apartment exhausted, still carrying the weight of everything she had witnessed and prevented. There was a letter waiting for her, a simple envelope with no return address. Inside was a note written in a delicate, unmistakable hand. "I never believed anyone could bring me to surrender. Not until I heard your voice. You were always the one they underestimated. And you were right to keep silent. Thank you for letting me see the truth." Emily smiled faintly. She knew immediately who had written it, the man she had captured, now reflecting on his defeat and the honor in facing someone like her. It wasn't revenge she had delivered. It wasn't anger. It was recognition. Respect. The kind that could only be earned through courage, strength, and an unwavering sense of duty. From that day forward, Emily Parker no longer hid in Willow Creek. She became a quiet pillar of the community, respected and admired, still modest, still approachable. But when the town faced danger, however small or large, they knew who would stand between them and the threat. And Emily, who had once carried her service silently, understood something profoundly true. Her voice, once kept in the shadows, was the weapon that could change lives, save communities, and sometimes even bring a dangerous criminal to their knees. She had never spoken about her service, not until the terrorist recognized her voice and surrendered. And in that surrender, she found her voice not just as a soldier but as a hero, a protector, and a woman who had finally reclaimed the respect and acknowledgement she had always earned. Willow Creek would never look at silence the same way again. And neither would Emily.